Welcome to Empowered Returns, a show that surfaces forward-thinking real estate advice that investors and developers need to help them invest smarter and build better. We are thrilled to have Bryan Lee here, principal of Transom Real Estate. I know PT and I have been looking forward to this conversation for quite a while. And we'll dive deep into your background in real estate development, history starting Transom Real Estate, and all things Bryan Lee and Transom here in Boston. So we're excited.
Yeah, it sounds fun to me. Hope not to bore you guys too much, but happy to have a conversation and been excited about it for a while now.
Awesome. Fantastic. Why don't we kind of hop right in? We can just talk maybe a little bit about your background to start. You know, I know you jumped right into real estate investment development right after college. So what was there, what was the impetus to get you into real estate in the first place?
Yeah, I it's not like I came from a huge real estate family background or anything like that. Studied finance in undergrad. And when I finished, I just wasn't drawn to like the stock market. To me, it was like this intangible piece of paper that just traded around and you had very little control over what the value was. So I just kind of gravitated towards the sticks and bricks a little bit more, like real assets were interesting to me. And then the architecture of that too. The thing that I think was most intriguing was that it involves so many different disciplines, right? Even as a kind of moron 22-year-old, you can still like look at a building and be like, I like that, or that looks like, a terrible building. Yeah, you start to like develop a little bit of that. And then as you dig in a little more, you realize, okay, I can start to work with, civil engineers and structural engineers and all these different trades and construction people. And you really get exposure across the spectrum of so many different industries. And I knew nothing about any of those, but that was the excitement, right? It was like, there's a lot to learn here.
Yeah.
So I thought that was pretty interesting to try to dig into.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I always say, a lot of people say it, but real estate and real estate development is really a team sport. So it's you got a lot of different disciplines that are coming into play to build and entitle, and develop and finance really cool projects. So that's what I love about it too.
Yeah, it keeps you on your toes for sure. I do remember the first time my parents put me on an airplane. We came up to Boston, actually. I grew up in Florida. We came up to Boston, and actually we stood right outside this building, and I was looking up at the Pru, and I was like, that's incredible, right? I think I was like in third grade, and I'd never seen a building that big before. And I just remember that as an experience. Not that
cool.
that like truly influenced anything, but
sounds like it did, Bryan, actually.
When you're that age and you're like, I think we all have these like, old memories that you can look back on with the hindsight of being an adult and being now, for most of us, well into 20 plus years in the industry, and realize, wow, I was always kind of headed in that direction. Mine was on Christmas, used to like build crazy elaborate like Lego space stations and stuff with my dad.
Oh, nice.
And like literally
I was eating them at that point.
And listening to him talk about it now, he's like, dude, like you realize that was like the bane of my existence. But it's funny, I was just always drawn to kind of that building element of things, and it's obviously translated as real estate became a career track. So it's cool how that stuff works. It's a good story with the Pro.
Nice. And so, Bryan, then you kind of, from your early couple of jobs, you jumped to the MIT real estate program, right? So why don't we talk about that a little bit? What drew you to that? What did you get out of it? Did you sort of get what you expected going in?
Yeah, sure. So I remember it was like 2007, right? So the market was like on the verge of imploding. And at that age, I kind of saw that coming, but I wasn't nearly as close to that as I probably should have been. And I just decided, like, I'm kind of tired of where I was doing what I was doing. I was mainly in a consulting role. We would do all this work, and then we'd pass along the report to somebody else, and they would go have all the fun. And I was like, well, that's not what I want to be doing. I want to be that guy. And so I started applying to grad schools. Just decided to study hard, do the GMAT, and just did the whole thing. Ended up applying to a bunch of schools, settled on MIT, and I'd say within 6 months of that decision, plus or minus, I was up in Boston, Cambridge. It was an unbelievable experience. I looked at it like, look, I think this is going to be great for the career, but I want to have this experience regardless, right? Like to me, it was just take a full year out of your schedule and go meet people and like get reinvigorated with it. And, like the passion, like get that sort of like motivation back again, where you sit in an office for like four years, especially those young years where it's the first office you've ever been in. Right. And you're like, wow, I was like bouncing around from class to class and I was so active, and now I'm behind this computer screen all day. Is this what I got to do for the next like 50 years? So it was really good to just take a break from that and get different perspectives. And MIT does an amazing job with that. I mean, you've got the class size is fairly small. I think my class was plus or minus 30 people.
Wow.
But I mean, half of those are coming from international countries, from Korea, China, Turkey, Europe, like just really interesting stuff. Mexico, and then we had a handful of people from Boston, and then around the country as well. So that background was really fun, and architects and engineers and developers and brokers, all that experience was all kind of piled into one room, and it was a year of like really just a lot of fun. Like it was a lot of hard work, but it was refreshing to just take a break from the office and go jump into something like that.
Nice. Cool. Awesome. Yeah, it sounds like a fantastic experience. I know from talking to you and some others who went through the program, it's this is intensive, sort of bonding, but exciting, but hard, but a lot of fun too at the same time, which is really cool.
Yeah.
And you build a network from there, right?
Yeah. And it's different than undergrad. For me, it was. In undergrad, I was like, my main concern was having fun. You're like 19 years old and like, this is a great place and you're on your own for the first time. In grad school, it's a totally different story. You're old enough now, you're mature enough now, and you just feed off that energy in the room. So everybody was in that same spot and everybody's kind of pushing each other to work harder and try to get smarter. And you're only here for a year. So it's like, how much can I take, right? Like how many classes can I take? All these professors are, like just so accomplished in their realm, and you just want to, this is a once in a lifetime thing. So it's like, just dive in. So it's a lot of hours because that's how we treated it. But great experience.
Nice. Awesome. Yeah. I think, so then you kind of jumped into a couple of larger firms related, but I think preceded by Beacon Communities, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. So maybe talk a little bit about those two experiences and what what you learned and what led you to forming Transom about 6 or 7 years ago now.
Yeah, sure. So first real job after grad school was Beacon, working with some super smart people over there. At the time, Howard Cohen was running the day-to-day. I think he's still like significantly involved, although maybe not in the same role that he was when I was there. But I wanted to learn more about affordable housing because I think we saw that as a major problem. It's a major problem today, but it's always been a problem, right? It's just it's bigger now. Hasn't gotten any better. But I wanted to learn a lot about that business. So we went over to Beacon. They had a giant portfolio, and they were looking to grow it. And I worked with Howard and with Mark Epker. And our goal there was to try to grow the portfolio to, I think, 20,000 units at the time. So we had a little like what's called a GP fund, general partner fund inside the company. And we were deploying that capital to buy up affordable housing opportunities, as well as and sort of like reposition those, renovate those, as well as ground up development opportunities. So we did that for about 2.5 years, and I learned quite a bit on the affordable housing business. And then got an offer to go over to, at the time it was Beal Companies. And so decided that I had learned a lot about affordable housing and wanted to get back into the market world.
Cool. And so what led you from there to forming Transom with Neil and Peter?
Yeah, so we were at Related Beal for 4-ish years. Each of us at a different spot. Peter was there for much longer. I think he was there about 10 years. And it was a great experience. We learned a ton. We got a chance to work on some of the biggest projects in the city and learned so much about what we wanted to do and how we think we could do things slightly differently as well. And I think, like, to be totally honest, at the end of the day, you just realize you're not getting any younger, and that it's something that we always wanted to do. And you hear this kind of like cheesy saying about the regrets that you have or the things you didn't do, and that'll eat at you. And I didn't want to wake up when I was like 60 and say, could it have happened? Would it have happened if I tried? And to me, people think, well, that's such a risky move. But you can mitigate that risk in so many different ways and make it less risky personally to yourself. And you can, along that sort of spectrum of risk, you can choose where you want to be in that. And so we focused a lot on that. We took a lot of the risk off of ourselves and decided to think long term about how to do something like that. And so I just thought, what's the worst that would happen, right? If this doesn't work, we're going to try, and maybe something great will happen. And if it doesn't, then I'll just go back to getting a job, right? Yeah, I was pretty confident I could do that. Yeah. And so I don't. There was never a worry that this is all going to collapse and I'm never going to get another job again. I was confident in my skill set, and I thought if there was ever a time to try it, like this is a great time to do it. So we all kind of huddled and decided that the timing was right, and decided to make a leap.
Yeah. Nice. So talk a little bit about like that planning and then that first year, right? So talked about mitigating some of the risk and obviously not wanted to have the regrets and really wanted to kind of take the bull by the horns and go out on your own and form Transom. Can you just kind of walk us through with a little bit of specificity kind of how that unfolded?
Sure. Yeah. So once we left Related Bio and we formed Transom, it took us, we come from a very institutional background, right? So when I think of doing things like this, it's just been beat into me that there are certain ways to do it. Like, you get attorneys and you document things, and these are like very, sophisticated documents. And we didn't
all
just
the favorite things that I have.
Process guys.
But I mean, it was like, all right, if we're going to do it, let's set it up and do it right. So we probably spent the first 3 to 6 months, doing all of that at the same time, looking for opportunities. And we certainly, knowing the Boston landscape as we did, not everything was a fit for our former employer, and we knew that, right? They have a very specific thing. They're very large, so they have scale that they need to execute on. They're typically doing high rises in concrete in a select number of neighborhoods in the city, but yet we thought there was opportunity elsewhere, and so we came thinking that we could execute on some of those ideas and some of those opportunities. As far as the risk goes, I guess on one end of the spectrum, you could just jump and say, I'm going to fund this all myself. Hopefully there's a savings account that you've, worked hard and scratched to save, and I'm going to fund it all myself. And the other end of that spectrum is that we're going to raise as much capital as we can from outside investors, and it's all going to be their money, right? And then you can adjust that in between. And certainly raising the outside money costs money, right? That capital isn't free. But it takes the pressure off of you. And in this Boston market, it takes so long to get from an idea and project inception to acquisition, design, drawing, construction, stabilization, and then exit. That could be a 4 or 5+ year process if everything goes all right.
Right.
And in the meantime, you're shedding millions and millions of dollars, right? This is not a capital light business. And so we wanted to take the pressure off of having to produce immediate returns just to put food on the table. We wanted to think long-term about Transom and how we can grow this business in a smart and successful way for the long term so that we'd be around for a long time. And so we did decide to bring on some outside equity to help us, to fund some of the startup costs, to fund some salaries, to keep food and on the plates and pay the things that we knew we had to pay, to loosen the pressure a little bit so that we could go out and do the deals that we thought were the right deals to do for the company and not just to get quick paychecks.
So how did you, if you can talk about it, how did you structure that kind of financing or that kind of equity investment from a corporate level? It sounds like not on a project level. And if you can talk about that, how did you kind of structure that or look at that, and how did you build that investment in the business and not in a project?
Sure, it's a great question. So yeah, the capital investment on the corporate side, fortunately, is a lot less than what is required on the project side. I mean, at the end of the day, real estate development, again, not on the projects, but on the corporate side, is like an office space. If you decide to take that, a couple computers and some hard work and a lot of sweat and a lot of tears and a lot of stuff like that. And we had plenty of all of those.
Tears on Tuesdays every Tuesday.
And so, I think we partnered with a group that we're very close with, that we do a lot of work with. They were able to help get Transom up off the ground, and they're also an institutional limited partner who was interested in funding the deals that we brought in as well. And so there was a lot in it for them. They made an investment in Transom, and they get a return on that investment from a corporate side. But also they had a front row seat at the opportunities that the three of us were coming out with.
Yeah, so they're getting sort of deal flow as part of the investment. Yeah,
that's exactly right.
Yeah,
and like I said, the capital investment in Transom there wasn't free, but I wouldn't do it any other way. Yeah. We aligned ourselves with a fantastic group. They're we still do a ton of work with them today. And like I said, it took a lot of pressure off to allow us to make the right decisions instead of just the speedy ones.
Yeah, that's so helpful, I think, because oftentimes you see a lot of, I don't know, maybe it's not the right way to put it, but sort of flash in the pan developers that find a deal. Maybe it goes well, maybe it doesn't. But, next thing you know, they evaporate because they don't have the ability to have that long-term thinking like it sounds like you guys strategically planned out. So, I'd say, smart thinking and good job long-term thinking, because, we just see this all the time. You see even developers that have a successful project, they just, fail soon after if they don't find another project immediately or another way to deploy capital.
Well, it's so daunting because, I mean, even like a due diligence on one project and just to get to the due diligence phase can take a long time, right? Find a site and then actually negotiate it and put it under contract can take a long time. And then due diligence alone could be $100,000 north of $100,000. And you haven't even really started yet. Like you're just trying to decide if this is a good opportunity or not. You don't even know. Super risky capital there. I mean, you're 100% right. There are a lot of sleepless nights early when, like, if you're a giant international company and you've got hundreds of projects, you lose one, right? I wish I didn't lose it, but I'm going to be fine. When you're a startup company and you have 1-2 projects and you lose one, it's a devastating phone call to receive.
Right.
And so, to have it all riding on if that one deal is going to work or not, was something that just didn't feel like the right move to us.
Yeah, and then you end up forcing things and choosing the wrong deals and diving into wrong opportunities.
And we said this for years, and I mean, it's literally a concept that translates even from like, your first time buyer all the way up to the big institutional level ground up development that you're doing. Like, you don't do deals just to do deals, right? You don't buy a place to buy a place. Like it's got to be the right deal. It's got to be the right decision. Yeah. And the way you structured it to give yourself that, to have the foresight to put yourself in a position where you didn't have to kind of square peg round hole something that might not be the right fit and be able to focus on the right deals, I think is really a testament to what you guys have been able to do, because you got some good projects.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I think another really key in that whole decision-making process was that we had a front row seat at real Boston development and knowing what that landscape looked like. And we did that at a pretty large scale for a long time. And so we were able to see all the pitfalls before they actually happened and became pitfalls to Transom, right? So day one, we knew, okay, what do we need? Like, what are the biggest challenges that we're going to face throughout this cycle? And let's plan around it. Let's figure out how we can solve those problems going in rather than when they land on our plate.
Yeah.
And that was really helpful, because those can be, if you're not ready for those bumps in the road and you haven't seen them yet, they can be big bumps.
Yeah. No, totally. I mean, and obviously you had a, pretty extensive career, and not just career, educational background too, going into this. So obviously you've seen a lot of deals, you've seen a lot of, probably things go wrong and ways to overcome that. Do you have an example or two of things that you would be like, oh, we really, consciously looked out for that, or here's how we think about, staying ahead of it and finding problems before they happen?
I mean, I would say from the strategic early planning stage, one of the biggest challenges that most developers would face is personal guarantees on loans. And so even if it's not a repayment guarantee, it's a completion guarantee. Well, if you're out there and you're trying to do a $60 million project and you're going to need a $40 million loan, the lender's going to knock on your door and say, well, I need like, I don't know, $15-20 million in like liquid assets. Well, if you don't have that, there's a big problem there. And we didn't, right? And so we thought early on, how do we solve the guarantee problem, right? Because that's going to be a problem. If I'm going to get a project up off the ground, I need to solve the guarantee problem. And so that's one. The other I would say is, using the same example of a $60 million project, it's going to take $20-25 million in equity. So let's go solve that problem before it becomes a problem. And let's go do it early, because by the time it's an issue in the deal, there's a million things going on. And it's very tough on time to just like find the deal, execute the deal, and find the money to do it. If you've already got the money ready to go, it's just one less thing that you have to worry about. And those take a lot of time.
Yeah. So how did you solve that personal guarantee problem? Were your partners taking that on? Did you get non-recourse debt? How did you try to solve those?
Yeah, so to the extent possible, we would get non-recourse debt, but they still do require completion guarantees, which is basically a guarantee that says you promise to finish this building, right? No matter how much it costs, if the costs go over what the budget on this page says, you gotta pay up and finish the building. And so we went out and found partners specifically that limited partners, institutional, that were willing and able and had the balance sheet to provide those guarantees for us.
Awesome. So maybe to jump in, I know because one of the things you see about Transom, you guys speak a lot to, is about unconventional thinking, design-oriented thinking, and projects, and really what you guys try to bring, and what we've seen with some of your projects that have been through to completion, whether it's Zero Athens, which we're lucky enough to work with you guys on, or 212 Stewart, things like that are really unique design element that you guys like to bring to the projects. Was that something that was out of the gate, something you wanted to do at Transom?
I think. Yeah, yes and no. I think we wanted to be out of the gate doing something different. I don't think that we knew that design was that thing. But we also knew that we were seeing a lot of, like, candidly, pretty terrible buildings going up in town. And we knew we didn't want to do that. Yeah, and so we identified, okay, we're trying to set ourselves apart as something different and unique. And we hate those buildings. So it was pretty easy to, like, fall into, like, okay, what are we interested in? Well, we are interested in making buildings that aren't so commodity, that stand out from their peer set. One good example that I think helped us in the formation of that is that, and I give Related a lot of credit, the Clarendon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
My partner Peter at Transom was at Related when they built that. And that was done in 2008 when the market was dropping. And there was a discussion internally about, should we lower the spec of this building, cut the costs, and make it cheaper? And the decision was made, let's not do that, because the competition at that upper level is very, very thin. But when you drop the spec, the competition becomes very, very wide. So that sounds obvious now, but in that moment when the markets are sort of collapsing all around you, it's tough to not start value engineering the nicest counters, the nicest cabinets, the nicest facade. And so, but they did, and they did that, and the project ended up becoming a great success because they had very little competition. And so I think we took that as a lesson, right? Like if you can set yourself apart by design, then you differentiate your product, and you're not competing against the entire market.
Right. No, it's another example of something you spoke about earlier, is long-term thinking, right? And not get trapped by the market varying up and down a little bit from time to time. Obviously 2008 was more than a little bit up and down. So I can imagine the pressure that was on them at the time to make a decision like that. So it's pretty impressive that was a sort of conscious and thoughtful decision to be made. And I think it's similar in a lot of cases. We're having conversations with our clients now who are like, "Oh, what's happening with the market now? Is demand dropping a little bit? Are we entering a recession?"
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of those sort of questions. Should we be value engineering this a little bit more than we have already, or not? And our point of view is almost always like, think long term. So I do appreciate that. Like, it's not just about the next 6 months; it's about the next 6 years, 16 years, and whatever the period of your investment criteria is. But I think that's a key part to consider, is really that long term thinking.
Yeah. And it's not. I mean, it definitely differentiates the product. I think each neighborhood, the definition of like what that design is different, right?
Totally.
So what that might mean in Back Bay might be different than somewhere else.
Yep.
But I think we try to think of design as an amenity as well. And so when you put those giant amenity packages inside buildings, it really kills the efficiency of buildings. And so where a movie theater exists could be units. Are people really going to use those interior amenities? Is that movie theater going to be used in these locations? And so if not, then you can take that economic package of what you were giving up in units inside and what you were paying for that, and you can bring it to other aspects of the building, design being one of them. So Stewart Street, for example, I think had, I'd give Howler and Yoon and Sasaki a bunch of credit for designing that building from an architectural perspective, but that's all on the outside of the building. So the amenity of design doesn't touch the inside of that building whatsoever. And that building's a really tight building. It's a 7,800 square foot site. So everything that you do inside that building is materially going to impact the efficiency of it and the economics of it.
Yeah.
And so
I would say Zero Athens is kind of like that too, right?
Absolutely.
That's a building where that amenity is gonna be like, I live in that building. That building is super cool.
Yeah.
From the outside. I mean, the design is really incredible, and it might not be loaded up with the amenities that a lot of the competing high-end apartment product has, but I think the rents are going to speak for themselves and are speaking for themselves because of that design. And, again, another signature one for you guys. That's pretty solid.
Yeah,
so.
Thanks. That we ended up using a brick out of Denmark called Peterson. The name of the company is called Peterson Brick, and we had done this like architectural kind of pilgrimage to New York City to explore all the best buildings in New York, because we thought there were way more buildings in New York that had some architectural significance. And there's this gorgeous building on Bond Street called 40 Bond, and they had used this. I think it was like maybe it was a clay product, but a bluestone. It was a bluestone product, and we just fell in love with it. And we knew it was way too expensive for that site, but we looked up the company. Neil, actually, a partner of mine, looked up the company and said that's a great product, but it's way too expensive. But he found another one that was very comparable, that actually was much more affordable, and something that we could implement here. So I think we're the first or second residential project in the country to use that facade.
Oh wow! Cool.
It's been used on like some churches and some other uses, but we're excited about it.
Yeah, it's a very unique building. It's a very unique design overall, and I think it certainly stands out. And it looked, even from the renderings early on, looking at it, it was pretty incredible. But now in real life, it's even more incredible. So it speaks for itself. And
thank you.
And I agree with you. Like, we've been talking a lot about amenities recently, and like, how do we recommend? What do we recommend? And oftentimes, I think this, everyone's chasing the newest, the coolest, the flashiest amenities, but in reality, what it comes back to oftentimes is just good design is important. And I think you guys got that. And obviously good location is critical. Like any real estate is very location centric, but even beyond that, there's other things you can do with amenities that are just the convenience type stuff, the smaller stuff, like designing a good package room where people can open boxes and recycle their packages before they bring them upstairs, and you don't have to have the rock wall in every building that you build type of thing, and that's the way we typically advise clients, especially in the kind of mid-market projects like a Zero Athens, a 50, 60, 100 unit project.
Well, you guys are the experts in that. I mean, we look to you all the time for that type of feedback, because you touch way more buildings than we do. We talked about how long it takes to develop a building. So we don't, we're a small company. We don't develop in mass quantity. We are very selective about it, but you guys are able to see and touch and learn from all these buildings across your whole portfolio. So, when I look at amenity spaces, first thing we would do is pick up the phone and say, well, I don't know, what does CHARLESGATE think? Let's do that.
Nice. Well, I appreciate the kind words there. Didn't even have to pay you. So how do you, I know you talked about using, this European brick, and I can only assume, and I don't know, the cost breakdown. I'm assuming it's more expensive. I'm just going to guess. So how do you make that decision? And I think differentiating is a great way to go, because when you craft something that has more of an impact on fewer people, you drive a better market response and try to design something that appeals a little bit to everybody. But how can you justify that, between your development team and your investment partners, how to make that investment to maybe spend a little bit more on a better material, a better finish, a better design overall, more expensive architect maybe?
It's a great question, and that's the art of it. I think, we mentioned this kind of exploration of New York buildings, but candidly, it's probably easier to do it in New York because you can afford to do it. You're going to have exit prices that are way in excess of what you're going to see in Boston. And so the challenge is to design within the budget, not just to design. And the brick I referenced is actually not that much more expensive than a metal panel. And the way it is because the way it's installed is actually quite fast. And so when you're taking into account not just the price of the brick, but how long it's going to take to install that brick and the labor costs associated with that, and the labor cost is a big part of that, and you do the math and you say, okay, well, this is actually like a 3% premium over a metal panel, but look what we're getting for it. And so that the math has to be sort of comprehensive in how much it costs to bring over, to install it, and compare that and say, is that worth the premium that we're going to pay for it? And we do that, on a bunch of different decisions in a building.
Yeah. And so that's an interesting point of view, which I guess I hadn't thought about, is when you're looking at everything that comes into it, not just the material cost, but the labor, how's it going to get installed? How do you stay ahead of like what the possibilities even are out there? Is it maybe it's you choosing the right architect or design team to work with that can help you and inform those decisions? Is that where it comes from, or is it something that you guys just try to look at the latest design trends and material trends out there?
Yeah, it's all of the above, I think. A lot of it is leaning on, the people who do this for a living, right? They're very good at it. And that's why we work with them. And so they are on top of the leading trends. But this is also what we love to do. And so whenever, you're on vacation and you're walking by a building and you notice it and you're like, wow, that's like really cool. And you snap a picture of it. That's going to come back in your brain when you're designing the next building. Be like, oh, I wonder if we could do that here. Or you drive by a project and you're like, I really like the massing of that. That's an interesting way that it steps back on and, makes a move on that floor or whatever the move might be. And it just kind of registers in your brain as this catalog of it. And hopefully it comes back one day. If it actually like meant something to you, it'll come back in your brain and you can start thinking about it. I don't know. We're probably giving ourselves more credit than we is. It's more like, yeah, that looked really cool. Let's do that. Let's just copy that.
No, it's really interesting. We like to dive into this. It's one of the things we want to talk about because in Boston, it's a very conservative kind of development space, really. And you guys are doing things that are I would describe as very unique in the market in a lot of cases. A lot of the things you're working on now and projects you've done so far. So, kudos to you, and I'd love to see more than that from my own selfish point of view, so I can find more more buildings in Boston that I'm like, ooh, that's a cool one. I got to snap a picture of that. So really, kudos. It's impressive and cool to see.
Thanks. I think some of it is also just out of necessity. We tend to find sites that are oddly shaped, and I think that's because maybe some of the market looks over that. Oh, that's not a rectangle, so that's going to be weird, and that's not going to lay out well. And we kind of roll up our sleeves and try to figure out that puzzle. And I think we're able to be a little more competitive on some of those sites where it's not so clear cut and straightforward. And Athens, I think, is a really good example. That's like a triangle site. And if you picture the floor plan of that, it kind of like sawtooths out, and that's to follow the sort of contour of that triangle, but not have like a slanted wall that would never fit furniture.
Yeah.
So it follows the contour of the sight lines, but it creates a bunch of corner units and a bunch of opportunities for light and air. And so, it's just kind of, I think anybody could do this stuff. It's really just spending the time and thinking about it in an earnest way to try to find the solution.
So, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that might be a kind of a good segue. I would say, design obviously is one of your kind of signatures as Transom, but I think about how well you guys have been able to entitle sites. And you just kind of reference like stepping back, right? Like Athens, obviously, that sort of backs up to, what's more of your traditional Southie residential area. And, a lot of these projects where you have to look at the massing and get creative with what you're going to propose. And, I think, again, that's been something that you guys have done really well. How do you kind of approach that on a sort of macro level? And then can you give a kind of a few specific examples of what you guys have done that might be kind of looked at more as, for lack of a better cliche, kind of outside the box on how you've entitled some projects and kind of optimized what, basically how successful the project can be from an ROI standpoint and maximizing density and pro forma basically as it relates to your approach on entitlements. I know you've got something going in the Fenway right now that, is kind of evolved in different ways as you guys have been, looking at it over the past 6 months, because we've had some conversations and sort of where you've landed on that. And I think that's probably a pretty good example of what I'm talking about. And you mind kind of talking a little bit specifically about that?
Yeah, of course. So I think there's no rocket science here. It's a few key ingredients. One is just honesty and transparency in the community. I'd say that's the number one. And I mean that in a way of like truly honest about it, telling them exactly how you think it's going to work and and listening to them and making the changes that they are in favor of. And I think that's really important, is an open and honest dialogue with the community. But also that is an open dialogue is a two-way street. So in the case of Stewart Street, we went in and we were very open about the height that building needed to be to get off the ground. None of those neighbors wanted to see that parking lot operated at, the way it was. But at the same time, the way that the economics of that site worked, it would never work as a 6-story building. Just not going to happen. And so we went in day one and said, look, this building has to be 19 stories tall. That's where it's actually going to financially pencil. If ever this building's going to get off the ground, it's going to have height to it. And so we're going to stick to the 19 stories, but we want to hear you about how it should be designed, how it should work, how it should look. what can we do in the public realm to make it better for you? How can we mitigate that height? But the height's important. And so there was a tremendous dialogue back and forth, and we learned so much from that neighborhood, and that building became far better because of the neighborhood and their feedback. It's their neighborhood. Yeah. We're there temporarily, and we're trying to become a part of the community, but we're never going to be like the person who's lived there for 40 years who knows every brick in their streets. It's just, there's a tremendous resource there, and we try to listen to it as openly and earnestly as we can.
I think that's a critical point, because and it's often missed I think in a lot of different dialogues for a lot of different policies and everything, is people just don't want to talk honestly with each other in a lot of cases, and they're just like, right. You know, they're selling a story that's not quite true, or sort of making things. And this happens far too often. Not to get on my soapbox on this podcast, but that approach I think is the right. Yeah,
go for it, man.
I'll do a solo show, maybe. Maybe a solo show. Yeah. But no, I think that transparent conversation is what can educate sort of both sides in the right way, so we can look. You're telling the community, we need 19 stories, or this is impossible to do. But we want you to hear your feedback on everything else that we can adjust, that is not a constraint of the height that we need here, and have that open dialogue is, I think, again, a very important piece of not just the real estate development puzzle that you guys are doing, but across society that we're lacking right now.
Yeah, agree. I mean, it's hard sometimes to just tell the truth, because you know that it might not be received that well. But at the end of the day, if you're going to get a project off the ground, you just there has to be certain truths to this. These are real economics. These are expensive projects. They need real investors, and they're not just going to throw money at a project that doesn't work. And so there is a truth in there. And if you're open and honest about it, people can understand it.
Yeah. How do you guys look at sites when you're going, when you're exploring new opportunities or new sites, in terms of whatever the underlying zoning constraints might be, or if you're going into an unknown neighborhood, let's say, like how do you think about that to the point where you even want to invest, time and money to sort of look if it's even an opportunity?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that's a bigger challenge for bigger companies, where they have to attack multiple different markets. We do business in the communities where we live, and we've driven by them a million times, and we've gotten dinner there. And so for us, it's easier to kind of know the street corners, and to know like that this block is great, and that block, maybe doesn't get as much sunshine, or it has a lot of traffic issues, or whatever. I'm making stuff up, but we know the market and the neighborhoods pretty well. If you ask me, where's a good spot to develop in Nashville, I would be totally clueless as to how to answer that. But there are companies that have to do that. We're kind of a smaller size, where to us, it feels like it's in our backyard.
Yeah. And is that your intention to sort of be that entrepreneurial, nimble development firm going forward? Is that, as far as you look at what's Transom look like in, 3 years or 5 years, is that the kind of the game plan, to be that nimble, we're going to develop where we know type of firm?
Yeah, I think we'd like to expand out, and we're starting to do that a little bit more. I mean, when Transom started, we were 3 people, and we were looking in 4 or 5 neighborhoods, and we were really taking the experience that we had of urban development and bringing it to Transom. But we've now grown our team. We've added a bunch of great, really smart people, and have started our first project out of the city, out of the urban core. It's a suburban project in Framingham. Mm-hmm. And the idea there was like, we're going to take that same like design sense, and we're going to bring it here where that might stand out quite a bit. And you have to do that within the budget, like we talked about. But so long-winded way of saying, I think we are interested in moving out further. So we're not talking about different states or anything, but we are actively trying to grow the platform, trying to grow the team. I think despite the economic hiccups, we actually see some of this as an opportunity to start like growing and buying sites to start entitling them. And we see a lot of those opportunities. So we're kind of looking at this economic downturn, if that's what you want to call it, as a pretty good opportunity to seize on some of that.
Awesome. Yeah, nice. You guys have obviously built a fantastic track record of thinking outside the box, finding those projects that may not, maybe overlooked by other developers, or, odd sites, or, interesting dynamics. So, that track record is impressive, and basically only it's been 6 or 7 years, I think, or so.
Yeah, it's been about 7.
Yeah.
It's track.
Yeah, no, it's an awesome track record already. So, Thanks. Congratulations, and love to keep it going here. You want to, dive into? I'm curious if we want to talk about the Holy Trinity project you guys have going in Fenway, and sort of as it relates to. We can dive into talking a little bit sort of affordability and affordable housing as well. But you want to give us a little background on that? I'd love to dive in.
Of course. I mean, it's such a unique project, and really brought together a couple key players. One being the church. I mean, I think the church, Holy Trinity Church, saw a real opportunity to use some of their excess land to help create affordable and middle income housing. So they get a ton of credit for that. I think they've done a great job, and it wouldn't be possible without them to do it. And the other key player is Samuels. And so the Boston Globe reported just the other day that Samuels is making a significant contribution to that project, which is a critical piece to help it get off the ground. And so it's 115 units. 48 of those are going to be affordable home ownership units. And the remaining 67 are going to be market rate units. But really started with knowing that the church had that desire, which they get a ton of credit for, and us being able to say, we know that there's an affordable housing problem, especially as it relates to home ownership. Yeah. And how can we solve that problem? And this project seemed to be the perfect opportunity to solve that problem. And so it's really sort of lightning in a bottle. I mean, we had the right people with the church. Samuels stepped up and made a major contribution, and then kind of Transom and Harbor on. We have a partner in that deal named Harbor on. And so the sort of day-to-day work of developing it will be the responsibility of Transom and Harbor on. But couldn't have happened without all these ingredients that came together at once.
Exciting. What is your take on, when we think about the affordability crisis overall in Boston and frankly, a lot of major cities now, how are you guys thinking about it? And I know you had a lot of experience with that at Beacon as well, when, primarily you're an affordable developer. How do you think, what do you see in the market right now that's happening, and where do you see things evolving for the need for more housing and to hopefully grow more affordable housing in a lot of cases as well?
Yeah, I mean, this is the question. It's like the hardest one, and if I had the answer,
it would be on this podcast.
I would be. I absolutely would be.
Thanks, dude.
It's just such a challenge, and it's not a new challenge, but it's one that continues to get worse, as we mentioned. And so, it's not just like low income. I think when people think affordable housing, they think like super low income, but there's certainly a problem there. But the problem goes all the way through middle income, and sometimes you'd say it's even harder in middle income because there's no resources for the middle income. And there's so many reasons, and I will never pretend that I can solve them. There's so many smarter people working on these problems. But construction costs are a major contributing factor to this. Land costs are a major contributing factor to this, and Boston's geography in particular, right? Because like half of our geography is ocean, and then Boston in itself is not that large geographically. And then you start to get into a lot of towns where it's very difficult to get zoning and permitting done in any of those. And so there's this pressure cooker that constricts supply. And so to me, the question becomes like, how do we thoughtfully make supply happen? How do we create supply? Because basic sort of macroeconomic fundamentals is like that's going to bring prices down. And so the solution is just, I think, really tough. I think that, you've got a lot of efforts happening in City Hall, and Michelle Wood, Mayor Wood, doing a lot of the work there. And she's progressively pushing affordable housing, bigger payments from the life science buildings, which I think is appropriate, honestly. I mean, there has not been a lot of mitigation going on coming out of those buildings in a long time, and there was a tremendous economic boom that happened there. So I think that's appropriate. And then back to the supply thing. I think that what the city did in the South End with that South End plan, and then what they're doing in Dorchester Avenue with the Dot Ave plan is a very smart way to do it. Yeah. They're allowing density basically in return for additional affordable housing. Yeah. And those are great nodes to do it at, where they're undertaking comprehensive zoning, where developers can come in and say, I understand what I'm getting, and I can actually permit in that, and that I have predictability in permitting in that zoning. Yeah. And that's so important from the development community. And it already, by that time, has neighborhood feedback. The neighbors have been involved in a multi-year planning process from very, very early on. So there's no surprises from the community either. So it's truly, to me, the answer. Like, you get the development community and the neighbors and the city, and everybody's in the room together figuring out how we can do it. Yeah. And then once they go to do it, it's already been figured out. And so to me, that's like the best way to do it. And I really hope to see Dorchester Avenue, finalized, and to see some of those buildings actually built, because I think you're going to see great density there. It's right on the red line, and it's going to be a real contribution to not only supply in the city, but significant affordable housing in those buildings as well.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. I think it's that honest discussion about the need for more density in return for a higher affordable percentage is really the only way to economically make it work. And if you can develop, comprehensive zoning, it doesn't have to be totally citywide, but at least in a decent chunk regional parts of the city around, especially around transit, that predictability is so important. So, developers like you and others can go in and understand without having to spend, a year just trying to figure out what may be possible there and all that time and money just to do that, but have some predictability so they can actually make, actual real investments in that. But I don't see there's any other way to do it besides saying more density in exchange for that more affordable percentage or otherwise.
Yeah. And again, in these specific pockets with predetermined zoning requirements that it'll take the shock factor out of like that one-off project that comes in and everyone goes bonkers over it, where you can say, hey, look, we did this collaboratively, right? Like, the community was very involved in creating this new zoning, and this project fits within that. And so you need to look at it holistically and not on this one-off basis and potentially have an overreaction to a specific project, because you both just said it, but like, it's Captain Obvious here, but density means inventory that will actually move the needle to create some semblance of balance in the supply problem.
To me, that's the answer, demand, right? But I guess nothing is without challenges, and I guess the challenge there is where are those nodes? Because I think they nailed it with the South End. I think that was a great spot, and it worked. Right, you've got so many buildings that popped up around the Whole Foods there, so there was real tangible results that came out of that. And then Dorchester Avenue, I think we're early in that story, but it's going to work. If you look at the ownership, the land ownership, it's all very institutional. Mm-hmm. These are developers that know what they're doing. They have the pockets to do it. They have the experience to do it, and so it's just a matter of time. It's going to happen. Yeah. But like, where else can we place real density? And real affordable housing.
Yeah, well, and I would argue that it's it's not just a Boston thing; it's got to be a regional thing, right? And a statewide thing. And so you see some positive changes with the MBTA zoning changes as well. First, make it easier to plan around MBTA stations and transit stations, but still, there's still far too much of the attitudes where we don't want more housing in our towns and neighborhoods that has to get. I think we need more state leadership to solve for those problems, statewide leadership, because, frankly, it's a difficult bear without having an honest conversation. And oftentimes, the very local politics tends to devolve into, not real honest conversations, unfortunately too often. But, I think there's enough people at least thinking in the right direction that this is a problem that is going to get solved only with more housing, not to try to restrict or make it sort of more expensive to build. And we'll see. I'm hopeful, but it's going to be a long haul. To your point, there's a lot of constraints. There's a lot of challenges to do it. But we have to. We have no choice.
They're healthy problems. These are problems because people want to live here. They're moving here, and so we're trying to solve that problem. If everybody fled Boston, we would have a solution. Luckily, that's not the one. So these are healthy growing pains. Well, they're growing pains, but we need to. I think everybody knows that we need to try to solve them as best we can.
Totally. Well, good conversation on that topic. Hopefully we spurred a little action to try to solve affordable housing. No. But so talk to us about, what are some of the things you've learned over your career that maybe people just starting or newer developers or development companies should think about, that you've kind of learned, maybe some lessons learned, mistakes made, challenges overcome?
Yeah, it's hard. I would say, just very candid feedback. It's hard. Yeah. I think that there's a perception out there that, oh, these developers, they're, it's so easy, they make so much money. It takes a lot of time to do this. If you look at sort of the leadership, as you might think of it in town, of developers, very, very rarely do you see a 30-year-old, right? These are generally people who have been at it their entire lives. And there's a reason for that. It doesn't happen overnight. It just maybe seems like it does to the outside world. And so I would say that you have to be really passionate about it, and you have to have really thick skin, and you're going to have to get up every day at it and at it and at it, and it'll eventually work, but it's not overnight success. And I think that that's just a reality that's probably misperceived in the market. It's a tough business.
Yeah. Certainly is. I mean, we've seen, I know the perception is that every project, an incident gets entitled, it's a home run financially, but it's far, far from it.
Far from it. And you could work 5 years on a project, and you're subject to the Federal Reserve changing interest rates overnight. And you go, oh, well, that just wiped out millions of dollars of my work that's happened. And during that, you're writing checks, you're not receiving them. And so it's difficult. It's very capital intensive and difficult. But it's super rewarding too. Yeah. So I think, I would say that the lesson there is that you have to really want to see it through and persevere to the end.
Awesome. And then what is, if we were to say, okay, if you were to step back, look at the industry overall and say, what's one thing that you disagree with that maybe most other developers or development companies agree with, if anything?
Oh, that's a really tough one. I think I think a lot of people would say that it's hard to solve this like affordable and middle income problem that we have, and so maybe we won't try. Let's just do what we know. And I think that what we try to do differently is think about creative deal structuring. And sometimes that has to really come outside the box, and it comes with certain risk. But I think like the Holy Trinity deal might be a good example where most people would say, well, how am I going to finance half of this building as affordable housing? But yet we, took the extra step and found, Samuel's and found the church, and we found like special ingredients there that actually solve the problem. And so I think it takes more work and more effort to actually come up with creative things rather than in the box things. Those are never the easiest ones to do; they're the hardest ones to do. But it's something that a lot of people aren't looking at and aren't doing.
And do you feel like you're taking on more risk with those types of creative deals, or are you comfortable just because that's just the way you guys are made as a development firm?
It's time. It takes so much time to do that. So you're spending a lot of your personal time trying to figure out and work this puzzle, and you're hoping that there's actually an answer at the end of it, but there might not be. And so if there isn't, then you could have wasted a year or more trying to figure out a puzzle that couldn't be solved. And so there's a lot of dead ends, a lot of phone calls that didn't work out. We thought that would work out, didn't work out. Let's try something different. Let's try another path. And so time is important. I mean, money, for a good idea, you can attract money, but you only have so much of your own time. And so I'd say the biggest risk on those is just time and trying to run every dead end down and try to figure it out, and no stone left unturned to make sure that there really is an opportunity there and there's a way to solve that puzzle.
Yeah. And so in terms of something like that, or really any part of the business, between you and your partners and the team you guys have, how do you kind of divide up your roles, and who does what? Is it, you guys have functions you work in, or different, each, lead a project, or how does that work with you guys at Transom?
Yeah. So we all at a small company, we all sort of get our hands dirty on this stuff. So we all are kind of fully involved in everything. But my partner, Peter, comes from a land use and zoning background and ran the kind of related deal shop for a long time. So he handles a lot of our permitting and zoning and like sort of, city hall type relationships. I come from more of an acquisition and finance background. So I'm generally more heavily involved finding the sites, structuring the deal, finding how to finance them on both the debt and equity front. And then my partner, Neil, crawled out of a construction trailer, as he likes to say.
I've heard him say that. That is accurate.
Yeah. I mean, he
loves the Carhartts and the flannel shirts.
He does. He's got a great beard. I'm jealous of his beard. Super jealous.
Totally.
But I mean, kidding aside, he's super talented at what he does, and he's been doing it for a long time. And so he knows how to build buildings inside out, upside down. And so while we all do everything, we tend to have our core skill sets. We brought 2 people on to the team, a guy named Carson Land, who came from WS and Starwood. And so he's helping us on the acquisition front as well, a critical member of the team. And then Todd Stafford, who actually worked on our Stewart Street project for Consigli. Cool. And so he knew us through that project. And he came on board about a year ago, just under a year ago. So starting to build out the team and try to round out those skill sets and, like I said, grow the portfolio a little bit. But, the team's the most important part. It's who you work with every day, spend so much time with them. And these are great people.
Yeah. No, that's for me, that's one of the most exciting things about just having a business, or any business, is building teams and, working together and finding ways to sort of develop those relationships over time and have fun, hit challenges, head on, be honest with each other and succeed. And that's what's most fun to me. It doesn't matter, I don't think, what kind of business you're in, but that's really what makes it so exciting.
So how big is your team now? You guys have a big team.
Yeah, we've got about just about 115 total now.
Wow,
yeah,
that's crazy.
Yeah, so so we're scaling up and looking to continue to grow, and so a lot of exciting things ahead, I think, for us.
Yeah, that's
including
awesome.
This podcast.
Yeah, it's great. So I mean, but you may agree. Like, I think the team part is the biggest asset. I mean, it's how you run everything every day. It's the vibe. It's the company culture. It's so important. And I mean, we're just 5 people. You got 115 people. So.
No, but it's true though. I mean, I think what I usually say or often say is that the only true differentiator of any business is your team, and which is also a function of your culture. Mm-hmm. And so that's really what I think is most important. And there might be 100 other developers in the city alone. There might be 100 other, management firms in the city alone. But what makes us unique is our people and our team and how we assemble and how we build the culture that we build. And so that's really what it comes down to for a true differentiator. And that's why it's important for us to focus on that and build that and strengthen that as we go forward here. So one last question, then we'll wrap up. But I'm curious if you could share any tips or secrets to how you guys, since you're on the acquisition side primarily or functionally a lot, what are your tricks for deal flow, if you can share any? How do you find deals that are in Transom's wheelhouse?
We have really 2 avenues. We do the broker world, like a lot of people do, that it's a sure transaction, so there's some time savings there. You might not get the best price in the world, but if you like the real estate and you can see something that maybe others don't, then it's a great way to source opportunities. So those relationships, but it's really just like being around and in the community for so long in those relationships. They tend to take a long time to come to fruition, but they tend to be our favorite deals. Relationships that you think would have nothing to do with real estate one day will come back to you, and someone will have a friend who owns something, and they said, you just got to talk to Bryan or Neil, and Peter knows that town really well. You should talk to Peter. And so we get a lot of that happening. We bought 158 units of permitted land up in Framingham that came to us through a personal relationship of Peter from his town in Swampscott. He knew the guy really well. The guy was ready to sell it, and he called Peter up and said, hey, we should talk about this. This is a site that I think a lot of the big companies that you would know by name have looked at and chased. And we got it just because of those personal relationships. Yeah. So it's all like everything else. You got to treat people nice and treat people with respect, just like you want to be treated. And they're going to like you and call you back and say, this is a good guy. You should talk to this guy.
Yeah. Without a doubt. I mean, that goes back to the same thing. If you can deal with people transparently and honestly, whether it's a community, whether it's a partner, whether it's a vendor, I think that stuff is what plays and wins the long game, right? You might, if you're trying to rip people off and make more money in the short run and screw people, that's not going to work long term.
No, the reputation, it's a small world, and the reputation is something that is just most important to us.
Yeah, totally. Yep. So I think we'll start wrapping up here. But anything else we didn't ask you that we should have asked you, or anything else you want the audience to know?
I thought you guys were calling me to invest $100 million. I didn't get that question. Where can you put the money? Do I have a deal for you?
You send me your wire info.
No, this has been awesome. I appreciate you guys having me in and taking some time to talk to us. I think, we try to be as transparent and as honest as we can. We're just, we're trying to be out there, have fun, do stuff that keeps us interested, do stuff that we think the community would like, but at the same time, keeps us engaged. And I appreciate you putting a little bit of a light on that. And, to us, it's a big deal. To the rest of the world, it might not be, but it's exciting and it's fun to do this.
No. Well, fantastic.
No, just thank you for coming in, man. It's definitely great to, hear some of your insight and get a little bit deeper into the backstory on how you guys got to where you are, and really impressed with what you guys have been able to accomplish, and I know there's a lot more coming.
Yeah. Thanks, and we look forward to working with you guys too. Athens is one. Hopefully we'll have a couple more right around the corner.
That sounds exciting. And where do people find you if they want to reach out to you, if they have a deal for you or anything else?
TransomRealEstate.com is our website. I think all of our email addresses are up there, so that's probably the easiest place to find me.
Excellent. Well, Bryan, looking forward to more conversations and working together more. And thanks for today.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Thanks, BT.
All right. Thanks, Bryan.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Empowered Returns. If you're a forward-thinking real estate investor or developer looking for actionable advice that will help you generate market-beating returns, make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast fix. I'm Mike DiMella with CHARLESGATE, and I'd love to connect on LinkedIn and further the conversation for any specific questions you may have. Thank you for listening.